The 1960s was the true last decade of raw, uncompromising artistic risk. Studios back then accidentally buried some of the greatest films ever made just because audiences were too stupid to appreciate them at the time. Here are 23 forgotten 1960s flops that were secretly absolute masterpieces, and why modern directors wish they had this much guts. Number 1. Seconds, 1966. Imagine being a deeply miserable middle-aged banker who secretly pays a shadowy underground organization to give you a completely new life, a new identity, and a surgically altered face, only to realize you are still fundamentally empty inside. That is the terrifying, brilliant premise of John Frankenheimer's Seconds, starring Rock Hudson in arguably the bravest, most daring performance of his entire career. When mainstream audiences walked into theaters in 1966, they fully expected the usual charming, romantic Rock Hudson comedy. Instead, they got a grotesque, deeply disturbing Kafkaesque nightmare that made them physically uncomfortable and deeply unsettled. The film was a massive commercial disaster, outright rejected by crowds who found its claustrophobic horror and brutal existential dread completely unpalatable. But viewed today, Seconds is an absolute triumph of paranoid 60s cinema. It brilliantly anticipates the massive cultural disillusionment of the late 1960s by several years. The groundbreaking cinematography by the legendary James Wong Howe is incredibly revolutionary, using distorted wide-angle lenses, frantic handheld cameras, and bizarre angles to make the viewer feel as unbalanced and trapped as the doomed protagonist. The infamous grape-crushing orgy sequence remains one of the most viscerally unsettling moments in all of American film history. Hudson's tragic, vulnerable performance completely strips away his matinee idol gloss to reveal a profoundly sad man trapped in a manufactured body that isn't his. Seconds is a brilliant, horrifying exploration of identity, consumerism, and the utter futility of running away from yourself. It was simply too smart, too dark, and too honest for 1966, making it a forgotten flop that truly deserves top-tier classic status. Number 2. Point Blank, 1967. John Boorman's Point Blank completely redefined the revenge genre, yet it utterly baffled audiences upon its initial release. Starring a terrifyingly stoic Lee Marvin as Walker, a man ruthlessly shot and left for dead on Alcatraz Island by his partner and his own wife. Walker survives, violently claws his way back to civilization, and embarks on a relentless, icy quest to retrieve his stolen $93,000. Audiences in 1967, expecting a straightforward, patriotic action thriller, were utterly confused by the film's surreal, fragmented narrative and cold, detached violence. It died a miserable death at the box office. However, Point Blank is now recognized as the undisputed blueprint for the modern action film. It entirely dispenses with traditional morality, presenting Walker not as a heroic figure, but as an unstoppable force of nature, almost like a vengeful ghost haunting the sterile corridors of corporate Los Angeles. Boorman's direction is incredibly stylish, utilizing stark architectural spaces, jarring jump cuts, and hallucinatory sequences that brilliantly blur the line between reality and a dying man's fever dream. The film's experimental sound design, echoing footsteps, overlapping dialogue, and eerie silence, creates an atmosphere of profound psychological isolation. Marvin's minimalist performance is phenomenal, conveying deep-seated rage with just a stone-cold glare. Point Blank heavily influenced everything from the French New Wave to modern neo-noirs. It is a cold, brutal, and dazzlingly inventive masterpiece that was simply decades ahead of its easily confused audience. Number 3. The Great Silence, 1968. Spaghetti westerns were usually defined by stoic heroes and triumphant justice, but Sergio Corbucci viciously subverted those expectations with The Great Silence. Jean-Louis Trintignant plays Silence, a mute gunslinger who shoots the thumbs off his opponents, hired to protect a widow from a bloodthirsty bounty killer played with sadistic glee by Klaus Kinski. Set in a blindingly white, snowbound Utah, the film's bleak, freezing atmosphere was a radical departure from the dusty deserts of the genre. When it premiered, audiences absolutely despised the ending. In a shocking departure from convention, the hero does not win, Silence is brutally gunned down, and the villains ride away victorious. This unrelenting nihilism led to catastrophic box office returns. Yet today, it is hailed as a profound, politically charged masterpiece. Corbucci used the Western framework to deliver a scathing allegory for the political assassinations of the 1960s and the inherent corruption of capitalist systems, where the wealthy literally put bounties on the poor. Ennio Morricone's haunting, melancholic score is arguably his most beautiful and tragic work. The cinematography is stark and gorgeous, contrasting the crimson blood against the endless white snow. The Great Silence is a daring, uncompromising film that brutally dismantled the mythos of the American West. Its initial failure was simply the result of an audience unprepared for a Western that held up a dark mirror to their own violent reality. Number 4. Shock Corridor, 1963. Director Samuel Fuller was a maverick who never backed down from explosive social issues, and Shock Corridor is his most audacious, hallucinatory statement. The film follows a ruthless journalist who fakes insanity to be committed to a psychiatric hospital, intending to solve a murder and win a Pulitzer Prize. Once inside, the harsh treatments and oppressive environment begin to genuinely unravel his mind. Upon release, it was dismissed by many critics as cheap, sensationalist exploitation fare, and it failed to find a substantial audience. But time has revealed Shock Corridor to be a wildly brilliant, deeply unsettling masterpiece of cinematic expressionism. Fuller uses the mental institution as a microcosm of a fractured American society, tackling racism, the nuclear family, and the McCarthy era through the broken patients. The film is famous for its stunning, vividly colored nightmare sequences, particularly the rain-soaked corridor dream, which are jaw-droppingly inventive and visually striking. Fuller's direction is aggressive, punchy, and unapologetically melodramatic, punching the viewer in the gut with raw emotional power. The performances are wonderfully over the top, grounding the surreal narrative in genuine human tragedy. It is a film that defies conventional logic, operating instead on the terrifying logic of a decaying mind. Shock Corridor was far too raw and stylistically aggressive for the early 60s, but its fearless confrontation of societal madness makes it an essential, unforgettable masterwork today. Number 5. Targets, 1968. Peter Bogdanovich's directorial debut is a chilling, deeply intelligent dissection of cinematic violence and real-world terror. The film weaves together two parallel stories: an aging, weary horror icon, played by Boris Karloff in his final great role, who feels his gothic monster movies are outdated, and a clean-cut, seemingly normal young man who secretly stockpiles weapons and goes on a random sniper rampage from a water tower. A year marred by the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, audiences were entirely too traumatized by real-life headlines to stomach this fictional portrayal of a mass shooter. It was a commercial disaster. Yet, Targets is now viewed as a terrifyingly prescient masterpiece. Bogdanovich brilliantly contrasts the artificial, theatrical scares of Karloff's old monster movies with the banal, unpredictable, and truly horrifying nature of modern random violence. The sniper isn't a monster, he's a bland, smiling all-American boy, making his crimes infinitely more disturbing. Karloff's performance is deeply moving, essentially playing a melancholic version of himself, lamenting the changing face of fear. The climactic sniper attack at a drive-in theater is a masterclass in suspense and meta-commentary. Targets is a profound, quietly devastating film that accurately predicted the terrifying shift from fictional monsters to real-world monsters. Number 6. The Producers, 1967. It is almost impossible to believe that Mel Brooks's wildly iconic comedy was initially a massive flop, but the historical record is undeniable. The Producers follows a crooked Broadway producer and a neurotic accountant who scheme to deliberately produce the worst play in history, a gloriously terrible musical called Springtime for Hitler, in order to oversell shares and keep the leftover money. In 1967, the very concept of a comedic satire centered around Adolf Hitler was considered deeply offensive and in incredibly poor taste. Many theaters refused to show it, and audiences walked out in shock and disgust. It barely made a dent at the box office. However, history has vindicated The Producers as an absolute comedic masterpiece. Brooks' debut film is a fearless, relentless assault on bad taste, bursting with anarchic energy and brilliantly constructed gags. Zero Mostel and Gene Wilder deliver career-defining performances, their explosive chemistry driving the entire chaotic narrative. The film mercilessly satirizes the greed of capitalism and the absurdity of show business, with a level of sophistication hidden beneath the crude exterior. The Springtime for Hitler number itself is a piece of comedic genius, so wrong yet so perfectly executed that it forces the viewer into hysterical, guilty laughter. The Producers was simply too ahead of its time, requiring a later, more cynical generation to fully appreciate its boundary-pushing brilliance and undeniable comedic perfection. Number 7. Mickey 1, 1965. Fresh off the success of Bonnie and Clyde, it is easy to forget that director Arthur Penn and star Warren Beatty first collaborated on this deeply bizarre, avant-garde neo-noir. Beatty plays a stand-up comedian who accidentally runs up a massive gambling debt to the mob, forcing him to flee to Chicago, where he lives in constant, suffocating paranoia under an assumed name. Audiences in 1965 expecting a light-hearted romantic comedy or a standard thriller were completely alienated by the film's dense, French New Wave-inspired fragmentation. It was a resounding commercial failure, but viewed today, Mickey 1 is a mesmerizing, dreamlike masterpiece of 60s cinema. Penn abandons traditional narrative structure in favor of a subjective, anxiety-ridden flow of consciousness. The film is drenched in existential dread, exploring themes of identity, guilt, and the inescapable nature of one's past. Stan Getz's cool, melancholic jazz score perfectly underscores the protagonist's deep alienation. Beatty gives a remarkably vulnerable, unhinged performance, stripping away his conventional leading man charisma to portray a man psychologically unraveling. The cinematography is incredibly inventive, utilizing stark shadows, disorienting angles, and symbolic imagery that elevates the material into high art. Mickey 1 is a bold, uncompromising experiment in American filmmaking that bravely prioritized psychological depth over commercial accessibility, making it a secret masterpiece that demands modern rediscovery. Number 8. The Loved One, 1965. Adapting Evelyn Waugh's satirical novel for the screen was always going to be a risky proposition, but director Tony Richardson took that risk to wild, chaotic extremes. The film is a vicious, absurdist black comedy attacking the American funeral industry, following a young British poet who gets entangled in the bizarre, highly lucrative business of burying the dead in Los Angeles. Upon release, it was met with sheer bewilderment. The tone was deemed too macabre, the satire too biting, and it was slapped with a restrictive rating that kept audiences away. It died a quick, painful death at the box office. Yet, The Loved One has aged into a spectacularly weird, subversive masterpiece. The film boasts an astonishingly eclectic cast, including Rod Steiger as a heavily accented, unhinged mortician, and Liberace as a casket salesman, delivering performances of pure, unbridled insanity. Richardson's direction is a whirlwind of visual gags, sharp dialogue, and outrageous set pieces that blur the line between comedy and horror. It mercilessly lampoons American consumerism, the sanitization of death, and the superficiality of Hollywood culture. The film's willingness to go to such dark, uncomfortable places for a laugh is utterly fearless. The Loved One is a gloriously savage, impeccably crafted satire that was simply too strange and too corrosive for the mid-60s mainstream audience. Number 9. Pretty Poison, 1968. This brilliantly twisted neo-noir completely upends the standard boy-meets-girl narrative, transforming it into something deeply sinister. Anthony Perkins plays a deeply troubled, pathologically lying ex-convict who becomes obsessed with a beautiful, seemingly innocent high school cheerleader, played by Tuesday Weld. He ropes her into a fake plot to murder his supposed enemy, but the reality of their dynamic turns out to be far more disturbing. Marketed deceptively as a standard teen melodrama, audiences felt utterly betrayed by the film's dark, cynical trajectory, and it vanished without a trace. However, Pretty Poison is now recognized as a masterclass in psychological manipulation and genre subversion. The script is razor-sharp, carefully peeling back the layers of Americana to reveal the rotting moral decay underneath. Perkins is perfectly cast, bringing his signature nervous energy to a character who thinks he is the puppet master, only to realize he is the puppet. But it is Tuesday Weld who truly shocks, delivering a chillingly cold, sociopathic performance that completely subverts her wholesome image. The film's pacing is deliberate and cruel, building to a devastating climax that offers no easy answers or redemption. Pretty Poison is a dark, deliciously evil little thriller that brilliantly exposed the hidden violence lurking beneath the pristine surface of American suburbia long before it became fashionable. Number 10. The Damned, 1969. Acclaimed director Joseph Losey crafted one of the most wildly unpredictable films of the decade, a bizarre hybrid of violent juvenile delinquency drama and apocalyptic science fiction. The narrative follows a sadistic London teddy boy gang led by the magnetic Oliver Reed, who inadvertently kidnap a sophisticated woman and stumble upon a secret government facility housing a group of highly radioactive children. The studio completely misunderstood Losey's artistic vision, heavily re-editing the film and dumping it into theaters with minimal promotion, resulting in a catastrophic box office failure. Yet, the uncut version of The Damned reveals a truly audacious, one-of-a-kind masterpiece. Losey uses the chaotic, brutal energy of the gang as a stark contrast to the cold, sterile, and profoundly terrifying reality of the nuclear age. The film is a powerful, pessimistic allegory about the legacy we are leaving for future generations. Oliver Reed delivers a charismatic, terrifyingly volatile performance that anchors the first half, while the second half shifts into a haunting, atmospheric sci-fi horror. The cinematography is stark and beautifully bleak, emphasizing the isolation of the characters. The Damned is a fearless, genre-defying film that refuses to offer comfort or hope. Its initial commercial failure was a direct result of a studio system incapable of handling such a bleak, intellectually challenging, and brilliantly unconventional cinematic experience. Number 11. The Shooting, 1966. Director Monte Hellman essentially created the philosophical acid western with this incredibly sparse, enigmatic film. Starring a young Jack Nicholson alongside Warren Oates, the plot follows a mysterious woman who hires a group of men to guide her through the scorching desert to track down an unseen target. Released on a grueling double bill with its sister film, Ride in the Whirlwind, The Shooting was completely ignored by audiences who found its deliberate pacing and lack of traditional action unbearably slow. It made virtually no money. But time has elevated The Shooting to the status of an absolute masterpiece of independent cinema. The film operates entirely on a mythological, almost dreamlike plane, prioritizing mood, tension, and existential dread over straightforward narrative resolution. Hellman uses the harsh, unforgiving desert landscape as a physical manifestation of purgatory, where the characters are trapped in an endless cycle of violence and guilt. Nicholson and Oates deliver fantastically nuanced, understated performances that convey deep psychological unease. The cinematography brilliantly captures the blinding, oppressive heat of the desert, creating a claustrophobic atmosphere in a wide-open space. The Shooting is a profound, deeply atmospheric deconstruction of the Western mythos. It demands patience, but rewards the viewer with a haunting, intellectually stimulating experience that paved the way for later minimalist masterpieces. Number 12. Woman in the Dunes, 1964. Hiroshi Teshigahara's existential masterpiece is an unforgettable hypnotic descent into madness and surreal human endurance. The film follows an entomologist who, missing his last bus back to Tokyo, is lowered into a bizarre sandpit village. He is forced to live with a young widow whose endless task is to shovel away the encroaching sand to save her home. Western audiences in 1964 found the film's glacial pacing, explicit eroticism, and lack of conventional plot development incredibly frustrating, leading to dismal box office returns outside of Japan. Yet, Woman in the Dunes is now universally recognized as a towering achievement in world cinema. It is a brilliant, visually stunning allegory for the human condition, exploring themes of entrapment, meaninglessness, and the absurdity of Sisyphean labor. Teshigahara's direction is masterful, making the sand itself feel like a living, breathing, malevolent entity that slowly consumes the protagonist's sanity. The black and white cinematography is jaw-droppingly beautiful, capturing the shifting, erotic, and terrifying shapes of the dunes. Toru Takemitsu's eerie, percussive score perfectly complements the film's nightmarish atmosphere. It is a profound, intellectually rigorous film that burrows deep into your subconscious, remaining a profoundly influential and endlessly fascinating secret masterpiece. Number 13. Le Samouraï, 1967. Jean-Pierre Melville perfected the minimalist crime thriller with this incredibly cool, highly stylized portrait of a lone hitman. Alain Delon plays Jeff Costello, a meticulously disciplined assassin who lives by a strict, solitary code of honor. After completing a contract, he finds himself pursued by the police and betrayed by his employers. While celebrated in France, it was a tremendous commercial flop internationally, particularly in America. Audiences conditioned on fast-paced, explosive James Bond spy thrillers found Melville's film agonizingly slow, quiet, and devoid of traditional action. However, Le Samouraï is now rightfully revered as the absolute pinnacle of cool cinema and a massive influence on countless filmmakers. Melville strips the genre down to its bare essentials, focusing on ritual, procedure, and the profound loneliness of the criminal lifestyle. Alain Delon's impossibly handsome, emotionless performance is iconic, conveying volumes with just a slight tilt of his hat or a steady, unblinking gaze. The film's color palette is deliberately muted, dominated by cold blues and grays, creating an atmosphere of stark, alienating beauty. Every frame is meticulously composed, turning the streets of Paris into a sterile, dangerous chessboard. Le Samouraï is a masterclass in restraint and atmosphere, establishing the modern hitman archetype that has been copied endlessly but never equaled. Number 14. Blast of Silence, 1961. Writer-director-actor Lionel Stander crafted one of the most brutally authentic, relentlessly cynical film noirs of the era, yet it remains shockingly obscure. The film follows a cold, detached hitman who returns to New York City during the Christmas holidays to execute a contract on a mobster. Produced on a microscopic budget and released without the backing of a major studio, it was completely swallowed up by the larger Hollywood machine and vanished into total obscurity. But Blast of Silence is a genuine indie masterpiece that deserves a place alongside the greatest noirs ever made. What sets it apart is its incredibly raw, grimy depiction of early 60s New York, capturing the city's cold, unwelcoming urban sprawl with stunning documentary-like realism. The film's most striking feature is its highly unconventional, second-person narration, delivered with biting, vitriolic disgust by an uncredited director. This harsh, poetic voiceover lays bare the protagonist's profound alienation and self-loathing, transforming a standard hitman plot into an existential nightmare. There are no glamorous criminals or femme fatales here, just desperate, ugly people in a cold, indifferent city. Blast of Silence is a fiercely independent, uncompromisingly bleak masterpiece that punches far above its weight, offering a visceral, emotionally devastating experience that puts modern, glossier crime thrillers to absolute shame. Number 15, Lord Love a Duck, 1966. This utterly savage, completely unhinged satire of American teenage culture and consumerism is unlike anything else produced during the decade. Roddy McDowall plays a bizarre, manipulative high school student who takes it upon himself to maliciously grant every absurd wish of a seemingly innocent cheerleader, played by Tuesday Weld, leading to a chain reaction of increasingly disastrous and surreal events. Upon its release, audiences and critics alike had absolutely no idea what to make of it. It was marketed as a standard teen comedy, but its relentless, scattershot absurdity and dark, cynical tone completely alienated its intended demographic, resulting in a quick box office death. Yet, Lord Love a Duck has since been reclaimed as a brilliant, prophetic masterpiece of anti-comedy. Director George Axelrod viciously skewers the plasticity of suburban life, the emptiness of the American dream, and the predatory nature of the entertainment industry. The film's humor is aggressively weird, anticipating the surrealist comedy of the late 70s and beyond. Tuesday Weld is phenomenal, delivering a performance that perfectly balances naive sweetness with a terrifying, sociopathic blankness. Lord Love a Duck is a chaotic, deeply subversive gem that refuses to play by any rules, making it a wildly entertaining and secretly brilliant takedown of 60s conformity. Number 16, The Day the Earth Caught Fire, 1961. While Hollywood was churning out colorful, creature-filled sci-fi spectacles, British cinema produced this stark, terrifyingly grounded apocalyptic thriller. The film is framed through the eyes of cynical London journalists who slowly uncover the horrifying truth that simultaneous nuclear tests by the US and Soviet Union have knocked the Earth off its axis, sending it hurtling toward the sun. Because it was a British production with a relatively low budget and a cast of unknown actors, it was largely dismissed by American audiences as a cheap, derivative B-movie and failed to make an impact. However, The Day the Earth Caught Fire is an absolute masterpiece of speculative fiction. Director Val Guest brings a gritty, documentary-like realism to the unfolding global catastrophe, making the unimaginable feel impossibly tangible and immediate. The film brilliantly focuses on the bureaucratic paralysis and societal breakdown, rather than relying on cheap monster effects. Its most innovative technical achievement is its brilliant use of a dual-tinted color process, washing the screen in a sweaty, oppressive yellow and red to visually represent the escalating heat. The intelligent, fast-paced screenplay treats the audience with respect, grounding the sci-fi concepts in real science and human drama. It remains a terrifyingly plausible, flawlessly executed masterpiece. Number 17, The Fall of the Roman Empire, 1964. Produced at the absolute height of the epic craze, this mammoth production featured staggering sets, thousands of extras, and an all-star cast including Sophia Loren, Stephen Boyd, Alec Guinness, and Christopher Lee. It details the political intrigue and chaotic succession following the death of Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Despite its monumental scale, it was a catastrophic financial disaster, widely mocked for its perceived historical inaccuracies and melodramatic plot. It effectively killed the sword and sandal genre for decades. Yet modern historians and film scholars now recognize the fall of the Roman Empire as an underrated, deeply intelligent masterpiece. Unlike the later, highly fictionalized Gladiator, this film actually stays remarkably true to the complex historical realities of the Roman Empire's decline, accurately portraying the economic collapse and military overreach. The reconstructed Roman Forum set remains one of the largest and most breathtaking physical sets ever built in film history. Director Anthony Mann brings his signature hard-edged visual style to the epic format, crafting incredibly dynamic and brutal battle sequences. Alec Guinness delivers a profoundly moving performance as the philosophical emperor. The film's exploration of duty, civilization versus barbarism, and the corrupting nature of absolute power gives it a weight and intellectual substance that completely elevates it above its peers. Number 18. A Big Hand for the Little Lady, 1966. Dismissed upon its release as a lightweight, throwaway television-style Western comedy, this incredibly clever film was largely ignored by audiences seeking the grittier, anti-hero-driven Westerns that were becoming popular. The plot follows a seemingly naive, impoverished farmer, his wife, and his son, who arrive in a rowdy Texas town and get entangled in a massive, high-stakes poker game with a group of wealthy, ruthless cattlemen. However, A Big Hand for the Little Lady is actually a brilliantly constructed, flawlessly executed masterpiece of cinematic misdirection. The film operates as an elaborate magic trick, meticulously leading the audience down a completely false path before delivering one of the most satisfying, utterly brilliant twist endings in the history of the genre. Henry Fonda and Joanne Woodward deliver absolutely phenomenal, charismatic performances, perfectly walking the tightrope between comedy and high-stakes drama. Director Fielder Cook masterfully controls the pacing, slowly ratcheting up the tension inside the smoky, claustrophobic poker room until it becomes unbearably intense. The script is a marvel of structural perfection, with every single line of dialogue and seemingly throwaway detail paying off magnificently in the climax. It is a wonderfully entertaining, incredibly smart film that completely outsmarts the viewer, proving itself to be an absolute masterpiece. Number 19, The Swimmer, 1968. Burt Lancaster stars in this deeply surreal, profoundly disturbing adaptation of John Cheever's classic short story. He plays a wealthy suburbanite who decides to swim his way home across all the pools in his affluent county, only to have his perfect American life slowly, agonizingly unravel. Audiences in 1968 expecting a breezy, heroic Lancaster adventure were completely horrified by the film's sudden descent into psychological madness. It was an unmitigated commercial disaster, yet The Swimmer is a haunting, undisputed masterpiece of surreal suburban horror. As Lancaster moves from pool to pool, the bright summer sunlight gives way to an autumnal chill, perfectly mirroring his crumbling sanity and heavily repressed guilt. Lancaster delivers a raw, physically demanding, career-best performance, slowly shedding his golden boy persona to reveal a terrified, broken man. Director Frank Perry crafts an atmosphere of creeping dread, turning the idyllic American dream into a nightmare of denial. It is a brilliant, terrifyingly audacious film. Number 20. Chimes at Midnight, 1966. Orson Welles famously considered this sprawling, chaotic compilation of Shakespeare's Henry plays to be his greatest cinematic achievement, yet it was utterly ignored by the world. Welles plays Falstaff, navigating the brutal betrayal of Prince Hal amidst the grimy, muddy battlefields of medieval England. Distributors had absolutely no idea how to market this pessimistic, visually dense, heavily edited Shakespearean epic, leading to an embarrassing box office flop. History, however, has vindicated Chimes at Midnight as an absolute towering masterpiece of world cinema. Welles' direction is breathtaking, utilizing deep focus, overlapping dialogue, and audacious jump cuts to create a visceral, muddy, incredibly brutal realism that shatters the traditional stuffiness of Shakespeare on screen. The Battle of Shrewsbury sequence remains one of the most terrifying, chaotic, and influential battle scenes ever filmed. Welles' performance as the tragic, larger-than-life Falstaff is deeply moving, carrying a profound melancholy. It is a rough, uncompromising, visually spectacular masterpiece. Number 21, The Train, 1964. John Frankenheimer's gritty, black-and-white World War II thriller is a masterclass in tension, yet it barely made a ripple at the 1964 box office. Starring a relentless Burt Lancaster as a French resistance engineer, tasked with stopping a Nazi colonel from stealing a trainload of priceless French art, audiences, saturated with glamorous war epics like The Great Escape, found this film's bleak, documentary-style realism and lack of Hollywood polish entirely off-putting. It died a quiet commercial death, but The Train is now recognized as the absolute pinnacle of practical action filmmaking. Frankenheimer famously refused to use rear projection or studio trickery, crashing real trains and staging spectacular, incredibly dangerous real-world derailments. Lancaster, performing his own dangerous stunts, brings a brutal, physical authenticity to the role. The film's pacing is a marvel of sustained suspense, pitting ideological duty against artistic preservation. It is a flawlessly executed, adrenaline-fueled masterpiece that Hollywood can't replicate today. Number 22. The Flim-Flam Man, 1967. This delightfully cynical, beautifully crafted Southern fried con man comedy was completely shafted by its own studio and ignored by audiences. It follows a naive young drifter who teams up with a legendary, irascible grifter, played brilliantly by George C. Scott, to hustle their way across the rural South. Released during the chaotic Summer of Love, audiences were looking for counterculture rebels, not old-school rural confidence men, resulting in dismal ticket sales. Yet, the Flim-Flam Man is an absolute gem of American character-driven cinema. George C. Scott delivers a mesmerizing, flamboyant performance that completely steals the film, bringing a surprising layer of tragic dignity to a man who makes his living deceiving others. The script is incredibly sharp, overflowing with colorful regional dialogue and genuine warmth without ever becoming saccharine. Director Irvin Kershner captures the dusty, steamy atmosphere of the South perfectly. It is a funny, deeply human, flawlessly acted masterpiece of 70s-style cinema before the 70s even began. Number 23. The Fireman's Ball, 1967. Milos Forman's devastating, brilliantly subtle satire of bureaucratic incompetence was banned in its native Czechoslovakia and completely misunderstood internationally. The film simply depicts the chaotic, disastrous organizing of a small-town fireman's ball, where the raffle is rigged, the prizes are stolen, and the beauty contest is a humiliating farce. Western audiences expecting the broad, slapstick comedy typical of foreign imports found its low-key, naturalistic approach boring, leading to negligible box office returns. However, The Fireman's Ball is an absolute masterclass in political satire. Forman uses a completely non-professional cast to create an agonizingly real, cringe comedy atmosphere that lays bare the absurdity, hypocrisy, and petty corruption of authority figures. Every failed logistical attempt and stolen sausage serves as a brilliant microcosm of a failing totalitarian system. It is a hilarious, deeply uncomfortable, and profoundly influential film that paved the way for modern observational comedy. An undeniable, fiercely intelligent masterpiece of subtle subversion. So there you have it. 23 undeniable, brilliant masterpieces that the clueless, easily offended masses of the 1960s completely rejected. If you still genuinely think a movie's artistic quality is determined by its opening weekend box office numbers, you are exactly the kind of passive, unthinking viewer this video was mocking. These films took massive creative risks, actively challenged audiences, and suffered financially for it, but their enduring artistry vastly outlasted their initial box office receipts. Which of these forgotten flops is your personal favorite? Tell us down in the comments below, smash that like button, and subscribe for more unapologetic film truth.